Hello, I'm Martin Ruppe with Ruppe Consulting and a board member of the IT community of IFMA. We welcome you all to day 4 of FM Tech Week presented by Schneider Electric. This session is brought to you by Freespace, and it's a pleasure to introduce you to Karasyova and Damien Chapman as they talk us today through Beyond Occupancy, Reimagine the Office for the Future of Hybrid Work. I appreciate everyone for joining us from around the world, and please use the Q&A function for questions. So let's jump into the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Martin. We're really excited to be here. So I'm going to share my screen now. And as Martin mentioned, please ask your questions along the way. We'll have some time in the end, and we'll go from there. Awesome. So welcome, everybody. I'm Kat, and that's Damien, and we're going to jump right in.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. So as a facilities community, our mandate's never been more complex. We're tasked with cutting operational costs and optimizing footprints, all while trying to create an environment where employees actually want to collaborate, engage, and even actually exist and turn up to the office. That's exactly the challenge that we solve. Founded in 2015, Freespace is an advanced workplace analytics platform that utilizes our own proprietary integrated hardware and software solutions to deliver total workplace clarity. We don't just capture data, we provide sophisticated analytics and insights on top of that hardware to truly get to the nub of the space utilization question. We strive to collect and utilize the highest level of data accuracy to provide the precise, actionable intelligence needed to confidently right-size portfolios, reduce utility waste, and streamline daily maintenance operations. Ultimately, we aim to give the commercial leverage to justify the strategic facilities decisions directly to the C-suite. So now we come on to the question at hand. Beyond straight occupancy, how do we begin to reimagine the office for the future of hybrid work? The workplace conversations has evolved significantly over the last few years. For years, organizations have been asking the basic question of how do we get people back into the office? But the better and more pertinent question today is, what's the purpose of the office? Or indeed, what would make employees choose to be there? That shift in thinking changes how we approach workplace strategy. It changes how we approach employee experience, space planning, and workplace technology. Every office is already generating data from occupancy data, sensor data, reservation data, badge attendance data, employee feedback. The opportunities and the data feeds are endless. The challenge is no longer collecting the data. Most organizations have all the data that they need, more so than they've ever had before. The real challenge is understanding what the data is actually telling us and how to turn that into meaningful action. Too many workplace decisions are still being based on assumptions, historical allocations, or at rudimentary level, the loudest voice in the room. So the office is already telling us a story. The question is whether we're actually listening. So with that, the fact that the office is already telling us a story, how do we listen? How do we learn from it and turn those insights into action? That's where the continuous workplace intelligence cycle begins.
And what is the continuous workplace intelligence cycle? And that's really the platform of learning, planning, implementing, experiencing, and then closing the cycle over and over and over again by going back to the learning portion. Again, data informs decisions, decisions drive outcomes, and outcomes generate new insights that fuel the next cycle. You're going to have churn, you're going to have different workforce folks coming into the space. You're going to have new teams developed, you're going to have growth. And with more different types of personalities and people coming into the space, your human-centric approach to your workplace strategy needs to be informed with different data sources, and then feed into your strategy. But at the center of it all, it's really your people, places, technology, and data driving those decisions and enabling you to bring those forward into actionable outcomes. Now, before we jump into a lot of the insights here and a real life experience and use case of a client, what we'd love to do is do a bit of a poll of where you guys are today. So question number one, which question is most important to your organization right now? I mean, Damien, we know this from so many of our clients. Everyone is on their own journey and they're in different parts of the life cycle today. So curious to see what the audience here is gonna answer.
We probably missed the option for all of the above if we consider
True.
artistic.
That is very true, but let's see where everybody lands, and then we'll have one more question, and we'll definitely move forward. But interested to see where everyone is today.
In terms of the, I jest with the all of the above, but on a serious note, I think these are distilling down to those top five that we seem to have across our client conversations. Unfortunately, I think we've landed correctly with the intro there, where we said the question is no longer about how do we get people into the office; it's every other question. So I'm quietly
Exactly.
pleased we've hit the right point here, Kat.
Sounds awesome. And now question number two, when making workplace decisions, what data do you rely on most today? And I mean, again, coming back to our continuous workplace intelligence cycle, there is so much data available in our office today. Are we truly leveraging it to understand and make workplace strategy decisions that are telling a story or based on the story that our offices are telling us? And so I'm curious to see where you guys land today and what you're actually utilizing.
Again, to reiterate the point, I'm hoping that the resounding answer here should be a combination of multiple and various
Wishful thinking?
various war wounds you and I know certainly have of a little bit of information can be a very dangerous thing, and using just either badging data or just employee surveys can lead to some very skewed decisions being made that we have some great examples that we necessarily can't share here with some confidentiality, but great examples of some clients who've made some decisions based on an isolated data set and then had to expensively row back on some of those.
Oh, for sure. My favorite one is probably leadership assumption. And here we are, it just reinforced that where there's a huge difference in leadership assumptions and when you actually see real-time data of how it's used. And there's also an eye-opening opportunity of bringing that data to your leadership and saying, actually, what you think is happening is not in fact happening in your spaces. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating. That's awesome, and definitely exciting to see your responses. So with that in mind, Damien, over to you.
Perfect. So as Kat mentioned, the first place we have to start is that learn stage. So let's get to where every workplace strategy begins, and that's learning what the data is actually telling us and walking through a real life scenario. So in the example we've got on this slide, there'll be a lot of numbers in this deck, and there simply isn't enough hours in the day for Kat and I to get as excited as we want to and really bring you all in. But using this as a framework to bring a real world scenario, we have a New York office spanning 2 floors, the 22nd and 23rd floor, which are a circa 300 odd spaces each. The building supports 840 users, has 11 departments. At first glance, the building appears really underutilized. We're averaging just 39% occupancy across the entire week. Like many organizations, attendance is very much concentrated on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which creates very different experiences throughout the week. While the overall occupancy appears low, the data we'll start looking through is actually showing signs of pressure in certain space types, and particularly in pod spaces. So this highlights a really important challenge. Looking at the age-old number of the 39%, a few years ago would have led to a C-suite decision of let's just remove half of the real estate and be done. The fact is that only looking at that overall occupancy rarely tells the full story. The key business questions we're trying to answer is there capacity to add more teams? A very, very pertinent question for a lot of our clients at the moment as they're looking to scale up. If so, where should that team sit? And how do we support growth without negatively impacting the employee experience, which is number one in every poll we have of clients of what's your number one aim to make sure that we maintain and improve. So before we can answer those questions, we need to understand what the data is actually telling us. Low occupancy does not necessarily mean excess capacity. So let's start start by asking the data a simple question. Where is the workplace actually experiencing pressure today?
Awesome. And before we dive deeper into the numbers that are going to drive our ability to plan for the future, what is driving these conversations forward and what's powering these insights? So everything that you're seeing here is driven by the Freespace intelligence platform. And what that is an AI intelligence platform that we give access to our clients to. We can utilize it through our system and giving you those insights. We have the ability to connect to our client and ecosystem and environment through MCPs. But really, what it's built on is it's grounded on workplace data, real estate best practices, and organizational objectives, giving those insights and allowing you to make strategic decisions, understand the story of your office, and really understand, more importantly, what are those actionable outcomes that are going to give you a huge impact to the way that you work and to your employee experience. So when we're looking at this slide here, what we're seeing is that there are different types of spaces. And also, although we saw on the previous slide that our overall average occupancy was sitting under 40%, we'd like to focus on the peak days because your Mondays and your Fridays for this scenario are the outliers. And so we're seeing significantly low occupancy on those days. But across your Tuesday and your Thursday, your occupancy is a little bit higher, and it's giving you a lot more of that storyline of what is actually happening in your spaces. And you're also going to see a difference between the 22nd floor and the 23rd floor. And so when we dive into it, we can see immediately that private pods, as an example, on the 22nd floor is under pressure. And what we call under pressure is anything that is utilized over 80% of the time, because it creates this perception of unavailability. And although those spaces might be available around the corner or on a different floor, in that particular section, there's a perception of unavailability. And so you're impacting your employee experience in a negative way because employees are not able to find the spaces that they're looking for. What we're also seeing here from a future planning perspective, to understand that we're growing in the space and we're trying to bring in another team into the space. Well, although our meeting rooms are performing fairly well and balanced today, the more people we start to bring in, that is another layer of opportunity for us to incorporate into design decisions, because it's an immediate awareness here that that is going to become under pressure as we move forward through this. So as we kind of look at this data and explore what is it really telling us and how is the rest of the building performing here? So the data here shows that this is not a building capacity issue, because the building capacity is there. But it's an occupancy that is heavily compressed into Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, where Monday peaks are only 16% and Fridays are only 8%. So you can start to make strategic decisions. Do I want to enable my teams to come in across all 5 days of the week? What are those things that I can make happen throughout the strategy? And what are those actionable outcomes? So when we look at it, the building is not under pressure. The different types of spaces are under pressure. But what about our neighborhoods? How are our neighborhoods performing? And so when we dive into our neighborhoods and the way that they're spread across the different floors, what we're seeing here is that audit and consulting are constantly matching their peak. And so they're coming in heavy on those days. Their neighborhood is consistently full. And so they're leveraging it efficiently, but they also may not have enough space for everybody to come in when they do have those larger attendance days. Whereas when we look at finance and talent, they're never hitting those peaks. And so there's an opportunity to rebalance not only your space and how your spaces are performing, but really take it granularly at a neighborhood or a team level and understand how those different teams are performing and how they're coming into the space and leveraging the space themselves. And so the pressure is concentrated within a few specific departments, but that's giving you those insights to make strategic decisions. And as we jump in from here, we'll jump into the plan.
Excellent. So a lot of data there, but I think it's important to note, kind of up to this point, Kat's done a great job of focusing on understanding the story that data is actually telling us. But the key is now we've got all that data, we've done some analysis. It's how do we move from the observation stage to actually forming the strategy? So that's where the workplace intelligence piece becomes a true planning tool. So we understand where the pressure exists. We understand which teams are impacted, and we understand where there's available capacity. The next step is now evaluating all the options and doing some scenario testing and some modeling to model the potential outcomes before making any changes. So that enables the workplace leaders to make informed decisions that align with the business objectives, but also then start bringing in future growth plans, employee experience goals, but also enable the conversations that need to happen from a change management perspective with the impacted teams, neighborhoods, management structures, etc., to speak with data. We all know that everyone's very territorial when it comes to space. Very rarely will anyone off the bat agree that they've got too much space and they could go and hand that to another department. But by using the data to validate and then the modeling to give the assurances that they aren't going to be impacted and it's actually for the greater good, but the employee experience will be maintained, is a real key to the change management piece that sits behind all the data and technology that we can offer. So let's now kind of explore what happens when we start that modeling different scenarios and rebalancing the space based on actual demand. So now we're going to start looking at how much capacity there is on the floors. So we can start modeling the different scenarios based on what we've already learned. The goal here in this scenario is to rebalance desk allocations so that no department exceeds 75% occupancy on the busiest days being those that sit in the 80th percentile. So Kat's already mentioned that anything that seems to go over about 80% capacity feels squeezed, and the employee experience and employee feedback really kind of echoes that fact. So 75% is the target that no department exceeds. So the chart we've got here highlights which departments can release seats and which departments require additional capacity with that new framework. So finance and talent on the 22nd floor represent the biggest opportunity for rebalancing. Through the optimization, the 22nd floor can release 38 seats and the 23rd floor can release 29. Audit seems to be only the department that requires additional capacity and it needs 5 more seats. So this creates opportunities to support future growth of the organization. So that will be through acquisitions, for example. Number one question we get from any real estate team who's undergoing some sort of acquisition is, can we relinquish the property or the real estate that we're acquiring and bring that team in? They also want to make sure that we maintain and improve employee experience, and we overall optimize the space without expanding beyond the real estate footprint today and indeed tomorrow, to make sure that we can make those plans to ensure that we're not squeezing everything in and not looking to the future. So rather than then making the assumptions, workplace leaders can then evaluate different options and understand the impact before implementing those changes. And now we can start visualizing what that workspace looks like before any of those changes are made. So here's just a very rudimentary and pretty common site we see that prior to optimization, this is the current state of the workforce. So you can see here that we're modeling an attendance rate of about 71%. That factors in sickness and PTO, etc. And this is across a 5-day week. The space is being allocated using standard planning approaches based on headcount and those other assumptions. But every department then receives a space based on that formula, regardless of how their teams are actually using the office. On paper, that looks like this on the floor plate. The floor plan looks great, balanced, and organized. The neighborhoods are clearly defined and allocated within each department. But the fact of the matter is the data tells a different story. Some departments have significant unused capacity, while others are constantly operating under pressure. Just kind of layering that and projecting that onto our own experience with our own Freespace office in London, we're on a 3-day-a-week return to office policy, but we have certain teams who are 5 days a week because, simply put, they operate best in the office. So we have a factory team, for example, who really need to be in the office. Those guys are outside of the assumptions we've got in the office 4-5 days a week based on when they need to be there. So the challenge isn't the floor plan itself. It's actually the disconnect between the allocation and the actual workplace behavior that's driven by the needs of the organization and the teams within. So this floor plan was designed based on pure assumption, the data obviously telling us a completely different picture of how people are actually working. So what we now need to do, and we'll talk through with the next slides, is how we bring the workplace strategy to life through people, space, and technology and knitting all of those together. So once we now have all of this data, we can move from the analysis to action and begin implementing that strategy. So the data's created the insight, but the strategy turns insight into action.
And at this point, we can start to play around again with those actionable insights and the intelligence layer of understanding how your spaces are performing, understanding how your teams are performing to make those strategic decisions. The first thing that we can model and scenario plan using our space manager and digitized floor plan solution, we can build a solution here around the strategy for your team. Now, as Damien mentioned earlier, you can have a 5-day in office approach where it's a static floor plan across every day of the week. What you can also start to model and play with is actually, I want to bring in different teams on different days of the week and create anchor days and team days. So you can start to play around with that and have those in-office days as 2 days, as 3 days, defining those days, defining those synergies between the different teams that want to work together and come in together, and playing with the numbers and the attendance. So we're seeing here, specifically with finance and talent, we can go lower on the percentage of attendance than audit, understanding and knowing how their teams are performing and how they're utilizing their spaces. And then generating those floor plans and associating their space in a significantly more data-driven approach that's giving you room for growth in an existing footprint. Without looking at any sort of rebalancing of spaces for now, we can already tell that with the release of spaces on this floor alone, we have 25 seats that have now freed up. What does that mean? That means that we can bring in approximately 30 to 35 more employees at a 1.4 ratio of seats to users because of the approach that specifically this client is taking. Now, if we were to generate a version of this where we're spreading people across the week and are incorporating Mondays and Fridays into it, you can do a lot more with that space and bring even more people in. So it really comes down to your strategy and what you're trying to achieve within your space, but leveraging the intelligence to drive that scenario planning and understanding what options you have and presenting those to your leadership, saying, if we do it this way, this is what it could look like. If we do it this way, this is what we can look like as well. And so really accommodating growth, introducing new teams, creating new different types of spaces is going to give you that opportunity to make those decisions. But the power is of bringing all of that data in together.
Absolutely. And I think just to reiterate, the scenario we've just modeled is a real world, real data, real client scenario. And the conversations we're having are definitely around these three areas with our clients, this client specifically, but in general. So around right size, right neighborhood approach, and generally the right design. So from the right size perspective, the data identified the real pressure points, not just the overall occupancy at 39%. As I said, not wanting to repeat too much, but in years gone by, that 39% overall occupancy would have made a very simple sweeping decision of we can reduce down real estate based on we've got too much and then we'll work it out. But the private pods on the 22nd floor were already under pressure at 83% in the busiest days, or the 80th percentile. The meeting rooms were performing well today, but when we modeled in the future growth, the data highlighted a pretty soon risk in the future that if attendance continued to increase, the meeting rooms were going to really hit a pain point as well. So the value there is understanding both the actions that need to be taken today, but in conversation and planning of the real estate strategy and the staffing strategy, what decisions should be planned for tomorrow and making those planning decisions today. From the neighborhooding perspective, as Kat really put in a great perspective, the analysis identified opportunity to rebalance the neighborhoods based on the actual workplace behaviors. They had 38 seats that were redistributed on the 22nd floor, which helped to better support the teams experiencing the pressure. 25 seats were released to support the future growth, where we can actually then support bringing in a new team through acquisitions, or indeed kind of creating space for future workplace initiatives or certain zones for other areas that they wanted to bring in as a value add to the employee. Teams that needed the additional capacity received it, while the teams with the excess allocation released the space they weren't utilizing. But what we were able to do was, using the science of data, was help kind of expedite that change management piece and the conversations to talk with data and start removing that really kind of vociferous conversations that were often had of the defensiveness of I need this, I need the team, and showing with data that you don't necessarily need that space, and showing how the scenario would unplay based on the future projections. And then the third piece is talking to the design and how we make sure that the optimized design is in place. So understanding the workplace behavior allows us to make those intentional design decisions. So increasing the pod and the meeting room capacity where that demand existed, we could focus that down to individual teams. Certain teams have a different profile of meeting rooms that they use to others. Really kind of slapdash example would be the HR and the people teams use smaller meeting rooms because they might have one-to-ones, whereas your sales and the marketing teams have larger meeting rooms. So again, using that kind of granular data to really target the design for the right teams rather than an overall, we should have 80-20 meeting rooms to desks. What we're able to do is then kind of rebalance desks, collaboration spaces, and breakout areas, etc. But the biggest takeaway before I kind of hand back over to Kat is that the outcome isn't simply a better floor plan. The outcome was the ability to make those strategic, data-driven decisions that align with the business goals today and tomorrow, but still factoring in that employee experience. But I think the key piece, and I'm sure Kat will reiterate, is that this is an evolution. This isn't a one-time exercise where you pull the data and you make that decision. We have the ability to keep evolving what we were saying 3 years ago in the kind of the initial return from COVID. If we had snapshot that data, we'd be having a very different design of the office today to what's actually being utilized. Thank you, Kat.
And just to wrap it up here, I know we're coming to the tail end of our time, and I do want to answer a couple of questions. Is that the journey doesn't really stop with the planning and the implementation. It really is about the experience. The real goal is creating an experience employees want to engage with, that employees want to participate in, and also ensuring that we are learning and continuing the cycle of learning, planning, implementing, and experiencing yet again. There's a lot more that we would love to show you. We don't have the time today, but if you do download some of the resources, there's some videos that you can watch about our Space Manager platform and how we intelligently can generate those neighborhoods. We would be happy to set up a demo with you to dive deeper into what data and information can be at your fingertips and how we can help you capture that. But I'll stop sharing from here. And Martin, is there any questions in the chat or anything that we'd like to answer?
I've got you on mute, Martin.
I think this is something is going to happen all over again. Well, we got two questions, and one was about what mistakes do you see organizations make when they rely just on occupancy data alone for their decision making?
It doesn't tell a story. Occupancy data, understanding the story of your office, incorporating different data points, incorporating employee feedback, incorporating badge data, and will give you that really solid data set to make the strategic decisions, to be able to drive workplace strategy forward in a very strategic approach. And you need all those bits and pieces because you can also validate to your leadership at that point. We've looked at everything, and we've incorporated this in our decision making.
Okay, thank you. And the final question we have here is, how do you balance the organizational goals with growth, with cost management, and workplace optimization, efficient space usage? Well, you still try to deliver an experience for your employees.
Damien, do you want to take that one?
I apologize. I only got half of that question because my connection dropped. So if you got most of it, I will defer to you.
No, all good. Martin, I do believe that it's really all about understanding, again, coming back to that learning, planning, implementing, and experiencing. You need to have a really solid understanding of what your corporate goals are, what your values are, what is the experience that you're trying to drive with your employees, what is the value of the office, what is the purpose of your office, and incorporating that into the decision, because you can quantify the return on investment from what changes you're making by allowing for room for growth without taking on additional footprints. Or you can even optimize your portfolio and really justify why you don't need that an additional floor and you can release it or sublet it. Or you have a lot more data to justify, actually, I do need more space. And this is what's going to drive our business forward and allow our employees to come in and utilize their space and come in with a purpose and collaborate with their team members and our junior team members to learn and grow and get their mentorship that they deserve when they're in the space.
Okay, so Kat and Damien, thank you very much. There's still two questions coming in. The both of you will follow up on those questions to the
Absolutely.
audience. Thank
Of
you so
course.
much for sharing your insights, and I appreciate everyone for joining us today. And we as IT community are looking forward to see you in one of our next sessions. For example, today at 10 a.m. with Setlink. So have everyone a great day, and thanks again for your sharings today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very
Thank you, everyone.
much.